Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The air was thick with early evening heat, the kind that pressed against your skin like a second layer of clothing. Rhea had just left a long, quiet strategy meeting at work when she spotted him, standing alone by the roadside under the rusted shade of a bus stop sign, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a worn black folder. Clinton. Her stomach twisted before her mind caught up. For a moment she sat frozen in her car, fingers gripping the steering wheel, eyes glued to the man she hadn't seen in 5 years. He looked thinner now, not sickly but stripped of the boyish fullness he once carried with careless ease. His jeans were dusty at the hem, and his shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat. She didn't know whether to drive off or open the door. Her heart thudded hard, not with love, but with the uneasy weight of unfinished stories. Before she could change her mind, she eased the door open and stepped out. She was halfway across the road when the bus screeched to a halt in front of him, scattering dust and drawing a small crowd of tired commuters. People began pushing, jostling for space at the door. Clinton lunged forward, trying to squeeze into the crowd. That's when Rhea reached out and grabbed his wrist. He turned quickly, alarmed at first, then his eyes locked onto hers. The noise, the bus, the people, all seemed to blur around them. Rhea, he breathed, stunned. For a second, the old version of him flickered, wide-eyed, stunned, unsure of how to breathe in her presence. His voice cracked slightly, like it hadn't been used in years. She nodded once, a tight smile forming. "It's really you," he said again, almost to himself. The bus moved on, forgotten. They stood there, surrounded by strangers, but somehow in a world only they could see. You look good," he managed, his voice low, slightly hoarse. Rhea shrugged, her eyes searching his face. "You look different." They talked by the roadside for a long time. The sun had dipped behind the buildings, leaving behind a grayish tint in the sky. Their conversation was cautious at first, then warmer, filled with half-laughs and too many remember-when moments. Clinton told her he had been working freelance jobs, but nothing stable. "I'm staying at Abulegba now," he added quietly. "It's been rough." She didn't ask for details. He didn't offer any. Instead, when she saw the tired slouch on his shoulders, the way he avoided meeting her eyes too long, she unlocked her car and told him she'd drop him off. On the ride, they barely spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy with memory. When they got to his street, he hesitated before stepping out. Then he leaned slightly, fingers gripping the door. "I'll send you my CV tomorrow. Please, if there's anything at your company." Rhea smiled and nodded. "Sure," she said softly. But as she drove away, her face broke into a quiet, trembling smile. Not because she loved him still, but because life had brought her back to the moment where everything once fell apart. Only now she held the cards. It began without ceremony. No confessions, no flowers, no official start. One moment, Rhea and Clinton were just two weary undergraduates trying to survive the chaos of 300-level coursework, and the next they were inseparable in ways that didn't need labeling. Their course had taken a sharp turn into unfamiliar academic territory that semester, statistics, legal frameworks, and abstract theories that left half the class confused. Clinton, usually quick to coast through things with half-read notes and last-minute study sprints, found himself floundering. Rhea, on the other hand, approached everything with an intense calm. Her notes were color-coded, her study patterns meticulous, her understanding sharp. Their first real interaction wasn't in a social setting, but inside the faculty library, where Clinton had grumbled under his breath at a complex diagram, and Rhea, seated across from him, gently explained it without being asked. It wasn't kindness out of pity. It was natural, fluid, almost instinctive. And from that day, the evenings became theirs. Not in the romantic sense at first, but in the quiet companionship of shared focus. They met without plans, always in the same corner, surrounded by worn textbooks and empty biscuit wrappers, the table littered with her neat handwriting and his restless questions. As the weeks stretched into months, the line between academic collaboration and emotional closeness faded so gradually that neither of them noticed its disappearance. Clinton, once guarded and proud, began to wait for her messages each afternoon. "Are you coming today?" Even though they both knew the answer. Rhea, though not someone to wear her heart on her sleeve, found herself watching the door until he arrived, her pen tapping impatiently. It was in those small things, the way she always brought him an extra biro, how he'd keep space beside her even when the library was packed, the way their eyes would meet after successfully solving a difficult question, that affection bloomed. No grand gestures, no fireworks, just the slow, steady stitching together of hearts over shared problems and mutual effort. Clinton started calling her my genius, half jokingly, but with a reverence he couldn't mask. And Rhea began to trust his presence, his laugh that lightened her evenings, the way he listened when she ranted about professors or broke down complex theories just to be sure she understood them perfectly. In a world where everything felt like a race, their corner of the library felt like a pause, a pocket of stillness where nothing had to be proven. But even in the sweetness of it, there were cracks forming, tiny, silent ones. Clinton's academic results didn't reflect the effort he thought he was putting in. He studied beside her, listened, tried, but while Rhea soared, earning distinction after distinction, Clinton's grades barely improved. She never gloated, never showed off. Instead, she'd smile and try to explain where he went wrong, always patient, always hopeful. But pride is a strange thing. The more she succeeded, the more inadequate he felt. And though he didn't say it, the tension began to show in his moods, the way he sometimes snapped during revisions, how he went quiet when she celebrated her grades. Rhea, ever intuitive, felt the shift but brushed it aside, believing it was just stress. What she didn't realize then was that Clinton had begun to see her success not as something they shared, but as something that threatened him. The library remained their meeting point, but beneath the open books and academic questions, something darker had begun to settle in the silence between them. Something unspoken. Something that would one day break everything. The day results were pasted on the faculty notice board. The corridor buzzed with laughter, sighs, and the slap-slap of slippers on dusty tile. Rhea walked toward the crowd with a folded sheet of paper still clutched in her hand, her notes from the last exam unconsciously held. Clinton stood beside her, arms crossed, trying to act indifferent, but his eyes flicked nervously toward the gathering cluster of students. The list was pinned under a dusty plastic cover, names and grades typed in neat lines, cruelly indifferent to the emotional weight they carried. Rhea pushed forward, scanned the sheet calmly, and then stepped back without a word. Her face betrayed nothing, but Clinton noticed the faint upward curl of her mouth, subtle, brief, and true. He stepped forward, ran his eyes down to his own name, and his stomach twisted. Another pass. Not even a merit. Just enough to crawl by. He stepped back, swallowing hard, pretending not to care. No one clapped, no one jeered, but he felt exposed, as though someone had undressed him right there in the middle of the corridor. Rhea reached for his arm gently, a small gesture of support, but he stepped slightly away, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve. In the days that followed, Clinton's silence grew dense. He answered messages with one-word replies, arrived at the library late, sometimes not at all. When he did come, his eyes rarely met hers, and his pen moved without intention, his notebook half filled with disconnected phrases. Rhea noticed. Of course she did. But she mistook it for academic frustration, not realizing the storm inside him wasn't only about grades. One evening, after reviewing a particularly complex topic, she leaned in and said softly, Don't let this weigh you down. You're not alone in this. Clinton didn't respond. Instead, he tapped his pen repeatedly against the edge of the table, the rhythm uneven and agitated. Then, without looking at her, he muttered, "Maybe I'd be doing better if I had your kind of help." Rhea blinked, unsure. "What do you mean?" she asked, voice laced with confusion. He finally looked up. "You know, the kind of help lecturers give when they really like you." The words weren't loud, but they cut with surgical precision. Rhea stared at him, disbelieving, hoping he'd say it was a joke. But Clinton's face was unreadable, his jaw set. She stood up quietly, gathered her books, and left the table without another word. He didn't call after her. He didn't move. By the next morning, the words had spread, not as quotes, but as whispers. In the way a group of students paused when Rhea walked into a lecture hall, how two girls behind her giggled after saying something in hushed tones. She kept her eyes forward, her spine straight, but something in her had cracked. She heard her name in the bathroom stalls, in half sentences, followed by laughter that didn't try to be discreet. It wasn't just gossip. It was rot. And though no one ever said it to her face, the rumor sat heavy in the air. She must be sleeping with someone to get those grades. Rhea didn't confront Clinton. She didn't ask for confirmation. She already knew. The silence between them had become an answer of its own, and yet she still returned to class, submitted assignments, kept studying. She told herself it would end, that time and graduation would clean the mess. But each time she passed Clinton in the corridor and he looked away, she felt a quiet betrayal that hurt more than the rumors. It was the look in his eyes, not anger, not guilt, but a sort of distance, like she was no longer someone he recognized, like he had unchosen her without saying a word. It was late on a Wednesday when Rhea's phone buzzed with Clinton's name. Her fingers hovered above the screen, unsure whether to answer or let the call fade into silence. She hadn't heard from him in weeks, not since the library incident, not since her world tilted under the weight of whispered lies. Still, something made her press the green icon. "Hello," she said softly. His voice came through, low and brittle, like a thread fraying at the edges. "I just want to talk." She stayed silent, waiting. Clinton exhaled, the sound raspy and uncertain. "I've been thinking about your grades, about everything. And I keep wondering how you manage to always get it right." The words weren't exactly cruel, but they carried a tone she recognized too well, an old suspicion still lingering beneath rehearsed politeness. "What are you trying to say?" she asked, her throat tightening. He hesitated, then said it, clear this time. "Rhea, I'm asking you again, who are you sleeping with?" The question dropped like a stone into a well, its echo stretching across the quiet room she sat in. She didn't cry immediately. She didn't even speak. The silence stretched between them like a wound too wide to stitch. "I thought you knew me," she whispered at last, not pleading, just broken. If this had come from anyone else, it would still hurt. "But you?" For days, she drifted through campus like a ghost, her presence dimmed by something no one could see but everyone sensed. She stopped going to the library. The space that once offered comfort now felt poisoned. Her seat remained empty during group discussions, and she submitted assignments without fanfare, her once vibrant energy reduced to quiet efficiency. When she passed Clinton in the faculty courtyard, he barely acknowledged her, sometimes turning away entirely. The boy who used to wait for her outside lecture halls now vanished before she arrived. She heard he'd been spending more time with some other classmates, ones who laughed a little too loudly and threw glances that lingered too long when she walked by. One afternoon, a lecturer casually referred to her as a brilliant but controversial student, and Rhea felt something close to nausea. Her reputation, once built on discipline and dedication, had become something everyone debated behind cupped hands. She never defended herself, not because she had no words, but because none of them felt enough. She had lost more than a boyfriend. She had lost the safe space she once found in her own hard work. It was after another restless night that she finally sent him the message. 4 lines. No anger. No accusations. Just an end. I can't do this anymore. Whatever we had, it doesn't exist now. I wish you well, Clinton. The reply came faster than she expected. Just 6 words. You think I care? Good riddance. Rhea stared at the screen for a long time, her heart neither racing nor breaking, just quiet. She read the words once more, then locked her phone and placed it face down on the table. That was the last time they spoke before graduation. No closure, no apology. Just silence, the kind that grows roots. And while life on campus continued around her, the flyers for final year dinners, the rehearsals for convocation ceremonies, Rhea walked through it all with a numbness that kept her steady. It wasn't strength. It was survival. Every time her name was mentioned now, it came with a pause. But she no longer reacted. Because sometimes the deepest heartbreak doesn't come with screaming or tears. It comes with the quiet acceptance that the person you gave your trust to was never really looking after it. Graduation morning came wrapped in a humid haze. The school field had been transformed overnight with plastic chairs arranged in crooked rows, banners fluttering half-heartedly above a shaky stage, and speakers that occasionally crackled as technicians tested microphones. Families gathered in excited clumps, dressed in colorful fabrics, fanning themselves and waiting to hear names they'd prayed over for years. Rhea stood near the edge of the crowd, her gown crisp and neatly pressed, her cap secured over a soft braid that hung down her back. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. Her mother sat quietly in the audience, hands folded on her lap, eyes tracking the list of awards printed in the program booklet. Rhea's name was there, bold and unmistakable. Best Graduating Student, Department of Public Administration. But to her, the honor felt weightless. She had no one to share the moment with, no hand to hold, no warm glance across the field that said you made it. Around her, classmates posed for photos, their laughter high-pitched and genuine. She heard someone behind her whisper, "Let's see if she bribes them with something else today," followed by soft chuckles. Rhea didn't flinch. She had mastered the art of not reacting. When the announcement finally came, it was brief and formal. Her full name echoed through the speakers, slightly distorted, but clear enough for everyone to hear. A small applause followed, polite, restrained. She walked slowly to the podium, her shoes tapping against the wooden steps. The vice-chancellor handed her the plaque, smiling widely for the camera. She returned the gesture with a practiced expression, one that didn't betray the storm beneath. As she turned to descend, her eyes scanned the crowd. For a split second, they met Clinton's. He stood at the far end of the gathering, hands buried in his pockets, face unreadable. He didn't clap. He didn't nod. He just watched. It was the kind of look that didn't ask for forgiveness or offer it. Rhea turned away first. Back at her seat, she stared at the plaque in her lap, engraved, heavy, and shining, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a scar, polished for display. After the ceremony, the university lawns filled with flashbulbs and last hugs, with parents tugging graduates into endless photo sessions, with vendors selling cold drinks and meat pies. Rhea remained near the faculty building, waiting for her mother to finish speaking with an old lecturer. Clinton walked past, not noticing her at first. But when he did, he paused, as if caught between walking away and staying. She didn't move. For a few seconds, they stood facing each other, not as lovers, not even as enemies, just as two people linked by a past too jagged to touch. "You really did it," he said at last, his voice oddly calm. She didn't answer. He tried a smile that didn't quite settle on his face. Must feel good. Still, no response. Rhea looked at him, not with hatred or hurt, but with something far more distant. "Take care, Clinton," she said simply, then walked past him, her gown rustling behind her. That was the last moment they shared before life tugged them in opposite directions. No closure. No redemption. Just a name called once, an award clutched in hand, and the quiet certainty that some wounds would never fully close, but they could, at least, be left behind. The email arrived at exactly 6:47 a.m., subject line, Clinton Eject CV submission. Rhea had just finished tying her scarf, her fingers brushing down the front of her blouse in practiced movements, when her phone buzzed beside her breakfast tray. She glanced at the screen, the familiar name flashing beneath the email preview. Her hand froze mid-air, suspended in hesitation. Outside, the compound's gate creaked as the security guard greeted the day's first visitor. Inside, silence folded over her like a warm, uneasy blanket. Rhea didn't open the message. She placed the phone screen down on the table and reached for her mug of tea, blowing gently on the surface, though it had already gone cold. The simple sight of his name in her inbox had stirred something she wasn't prepared to face, not anger, not nostalgia, but something stranger, a mixture of vindication and fatigue. It wasn't that she didn't expect the message. She knew the moment he stepped out of her car that night, when he clutched the door and asked for help in a voice far removed from the one that once sneered at her, that this would come. But knowing didn't make it easier. At the office, Rhea went through the day with quiet precision. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, attending to reports, scheduling meetings, reviewing proposals. She wore her authority like a second skin, calm, composed, respected. Yet, between every task, her thoughts returned to that unread email. Not because she wanted to help him, but because she couldn't decide what she wanted to feel. She wasn't the same girl who cried into a pillow or flinched at whispers in lecture halls. Life had moved forward. Her career was rising, her team looked up to her, and her achievements now spoke louder than any rumor ever dared to. But still, the idea of him, needing her now, when she no longer needed anything from him, felt like a moment too large to ignore. She thought about opening it during her lunch break, her hand hovering over the trackpad, but instead she closed the lid of her laptop and sipped water slowly, her eyes on the frosted glass window. Her phone pinged again. Clinton had followed up with a short message. "Hope you saw the email. Thanks again, Rhea." She read that one, then locked her screen. Later that evening, back in her apartment, the light was low, casting soft shadows across the walls. Her heels lay abandoned near the door, her bag slumped beside the sofa. Rhea curled on the rug, her knees tucked under her chin, the silence of her living room a sharp contrast to the noise inside her chest. She turned the phone over again and opened her mail app, her thumb hesitating above the message. It remained unread. All it would take was a click. A single click to open a document, scan a name, and forward it to HR with a short note. But instead, she stared at the bolded subject line and whispered, "Not yet." It wasn't spite. It wasn't revenge. It was something deeper, something that needed him to sit in the discomfort she once lived in. She wanted him to wonder, to wait, to feel the fragility of asking without power. So she stood, walked into her room, and left the phone behind. The inbox remained unopened. The silence, this time, belonged to her. That Saturday, Rhea found herself in her kitchen, sleeves rolled up, the scent of boiling rice drifting faintly through the air. She hadn't planned to cook. She rarely did anymore, not with her schedule, but something about the quietness of the morning tugged at an old part of her, a part that once found comfort in stirring pots while the world outside moved too fast. As she peeled the skin off ripe plantains, her mind slipped into a rhythm she hadn't invited. Clinton used to love boiled plantains with eggs. She remembered one particular evening in school, when he had come to her lodge after a surprise quiz had gone badly. She'd made that same meal, and he'd eaten in silence, then held her hand and whispered, "You're the only thing that makes this place feel like home." Rhea blinked the memory away, annoyed by the warmth it left behind. She didn't want to remember his softness, only his silence when she was being shredded by rumors, only his easy detachment when she walked away with nothing but her dignity. But the memories came anyway, not in the big, dramatic waves, but in quiet drips, soft, sharp, inevitable. After the meal, she sat on the balcony with a notebook open on her lap, trying to sketch the outline of a mentorship program her company wanted to launch. Her pen moved, but her focus slipped. Clinton had followed up with another email the day before, this time with a gentle reminder and a line that simply read, "I really appreciate you even considering this." It was the first time he'd ever used that word, appreciate. Back then, in school, appreciation came in gestures, half smiles, borrowed pens, and hours spent side by side, but never in words. Rhea closed the notebook and leaned back in her chair. She wondered what he imagined her life looked like now, whether he pictured her in tall glass offices, making decisions in boardrooms, too busy to remember his name. Or maybe he hoped she still felt something, regret, affection, softness. The truth, however, was more complicated. She didn't hate him. That would have made her feelings easier to manage. What she felt now was a strange mixture of ache and power, the sharp realization that the same hand that once trembled beneath his judgment now held a gate he could not pass through without her nod. Evening fell slowly, stretching golden light across the walls of her living room. She hadn't replied to the email. She hadn't deleted it either. It just sat there, like a sealed letter under a paperweight, untouched but not forgotten. She ran a warm bath, the steam curling upward as she eased herself in, her skin prickling against the heat. As the water lapped around her, her thoughts wandered again to the time she had cried in that same bath during her final year, washing off the heaviness of whispered lies, her shoulders hunched as though carrying weights no one else could see. She had healed since then, but scars didn't vanish. They lived beneath the surface, flaring up at odd moments like phantom pains. That was what Clinton's message had stirred, not fresh wounds, but the echo of old ones. When she stepped out, wrapping herself in a thick towel, she picked up her phone again. No new messages. Just the same one waiting, unread. Rhea exhaled slowly, placed the phone down again, and whispered to herself, "Let him wait." Not in anger, not in cruelty, but because healing sometimes is having the strength to do nothing when once you would have rushed in to save. The following week, during a lunch break, Rhea stood beside the tinted window of the executive lounge, her arms folded lightly across her chest as she stared down at the city street below. The view from the 11th floor was distant enough to blur details, just clusters of people moving through heat and exhaust, shadows shifting along pavement. From this height, the world looked smaller, manageable. She sipped a glass of water slowly, not for thirst, but to anchor herself, to quiet the dissonance inside her. Clinton's email still sat in her inbox, unopened, unacknowledged, and yet it pulsed in her mind like a slow drum. She thought of how easy it would be to forward it to HR, to write a quick note, attach a few lines of praise, and be done. She could do it in under 2 minutes. But it wasn't the action that weighed on her, it was what it represented. The man who once accused her of earning her success through shame now counted on her to pave his next step. The irony wasn't lost on her. It sat in her chest like a coin she kept flipping in her fingers, unsure if she wanted it to land heads or tails. That afternoon, she sat across from Ada, one of the company's senior analysts, during a quiet strategy session. The conversation drifted toward mentorship, gatekeeping, and how few women were in decision-making roles. Rhea listened, nodding at the right places, contributing when necessary, but part of her mind wandered. What would justice look like now? Was it giving Clinton the opportunity in spite of everything, showing she was above bitterness? Or was it denying him access, not out of vengeance, but simply because he hadn't earned it? He had never apologized, never acknowledged the hurt he'd caused, and yet he expected her hand to lift him. Was that fair? Her thoughts tangled with old and new versions of herself, the Rhea who once gave without hesitation, and the Rhea who now understood the quiet cost of self-erasure. Later, as she walked back to her office, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor, She thought about how many times she had given grace to people who hadn't even known they needed it. She paused briefly in front of her door, her hand resting on the knob. The power wasn't just in whether she helped or not, it was in knowing she could. And for the first time, she wasn't desperate to use it. That evening, she stayed late in the office. Most of the lights were off, except the ones lining the corridor to her suite. The building was quiet, the hum of the city softened behind glass. She opened her inbox again and stared at the email. Her cursor hovered over it, the little arrow flickering like a heartbeat. The act of not opening it had become symbolic, less about Clinton and more about reclaiming the dignity she had once been denied. Rhea leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. She didn't want to ruin him. She didn't want to be petty. But she also didn't want to pretend the past hadn't happened. She remembered every insult he hadn't stopped, every silence he had offered when she needed him loudest. Some people wanted forgiveness without the weight of apology. Clinton was one of them. She shut her laptop slowly, the screen dimming into black. The world outside glittered in yellow specks, headlights crawling like ants across the highway. She picked up her bag, straightened her shoulders, and walked out without looking back. The email stayed where it was, unopened, unanswered, and somehow that choice felt more powerful than any act of revenge ever could. Rhea woke before dawn, long before the neighborhood stirred. The darkness outside her window was still thick, with only the dim glow of a security bulb casting shadows across her bedroom walls. She sat at the edge of her bed, her laptop open before her, the cursor blinking steadily inside a blank email draft. Her fingers hovered above the keys, then moved quickly, as if they were following a rhythm her heart knew too well. The words poured out, not forced, not planned, but honest in their rawness. You once asked who I was sleeping with to earn my grades. Now you want help from the same woman you once tried to disgrace. She paused, her fingers still. There was no rage in her writing, no sharp edges. Just clarity. She wrote about the library evenings, the nights he showed up late, the silence that grew between them like a cold wind. Back then, I needed your belief more than I needed praise, but you gave the world your silence and me your suspicion. Each sentence she typed made her breathe a little deeper, like she was shedding something that had clung to her for too long. She continued, pouring out the things she never said in the moment. The ache of being alone in rooms filled with judgment, the quiet sting of every sideways glance she pretended not to see, the loneliness of excelling when it came wrapped in accusations. You don't know what it's like to have your hard work dragged through the mud, because someone who once held your hand let go at the first sign of fear. She stopped there. Her eyes lingered on the screen, scanning the email top to bottom. There was no bitterness in her tone, just the steady truth of someone who had grown through pain. She moved her mouse toward the send button, and her hand stilled. Not because she doubted what she wrote, but because she realized she didn't need Clinton to read any of it. The power wasn't in him seeing her words, it was in her finally owning them for herself. Slowly, she moved the cursor to the top of the screen and clicked Delete Draft. The screen went blank, and yet she felt full. For the first time since she'd seen his name in her inbox, she exhaled without tension. The sun was beginning to rise now, casting a dull blue across the horizon. She stepped out to her small balcony, the city yawning beneath her in half-light. In the distance, hawkers were setting up their stalls, the clatter of wood and metal faint but familiar. Rhea folded her arms and watched for a while, her thoughts still but not empty. She had not replied to Clinton, had not opened his CV, had not extended a helping hand. But she had not done it out of cruelty. It was instead a choice rooted in self-preservation. She had carried the weight of a betrayal that never received a name or an apology. And now she had finally put it down quietly, without ceremony. She would carry on with her day, attend meetings, solve problems, and continue building the life she had once fought for in the shadow of whispers. Clinton would never know how close she came to helping him. he would never read the message she almost sent. And that somehow felt just right, because not every story ends with a reply. Some end with a blank screen and the peace that follows. A week later, Rhea drove through her old neighborhood on a whim. It wasn't planned. She had taken a detour after a canceled meeting, and before she knew it, the streets began to look familiar. The roadside tailor's shed still stood, though the zinc roof now sagged with rust. A group of children chased a torn football across a narrow lane, their laughter rising above the distant honking of impatient Kiki drivers. Rhea slowed as she approached the old bus stop, the one where everything had restarted. The sun hung low, painting the asphalt gold, and for a brief moment time folded in on itself. She parked a little further ahead and sat in silence, watching as people drifted in and out of view, some glancing at their phones, others lost in thought. A man stood under the same faded shelter, tall, lean, wearing a shirt wrinkled from the day's heat. But it wasn't Clinton. Her chest didn't tighten. Her hands didn't tremble. She simply watched, then looked away, the moment passing like a gentle wave brushing against the shore and then retreating. She didn't think of Clinton much anymore. Not with anger, not even with regret. His emails had stopped. No follow-ups. No desperate calls. Just silence. And that silence had settled into her life like soft dust, present, but no longer intrusive. She had chosen not to open his CV, not to forward it, not because she wished him harm, but because it was never about the job. It was about what it meant to finally stop shrinking herself to protect someone who had once belittled her brightness. Her success wasn't something to be handed over like a gift, not to someone who never valued the weight of the journey. In those quiet days that followed, she found herself sleeping better, laughing more easily, and finding comfort in routines that weren't shadowed by unspoken expectations. She no longer rehearsed imaginary conversations with him in her head. There were no more what-ifs. Just the steady, forward-moving rhythm of a life lived on her own terms. The memory of what he'd done hadn't vanished, but it no longer held power. It was just a story now, part of her, but no longer defining her. That evening, she returned home just as the sky darkened, streaked with violet and soft gray. She watered her plants, tiny green things growing slowly along the windowsill, and let the cool breeze pass through the open window. Her phone buzzed once on the table, a message from a colleague confirming a speaking engagement she'd been invited to. She smiled. Her voice was being heard now, her story shared not as gossip, but as inspiration. As she prepared for bed, she stood before the mirror, tying her satin scarf, her reflection calm and certain. This was the version of herself she had once hoped to grow into, the woman who didn't chase closure, who didn't confuse kindness with obligation. She turned off the lights, sank into the warmth of her sheets, and closed her eyes. Somewhere out there, Clinton would wake up and carry on, perhaps wondering why she never replied. But that was no longer her burden. Some stories end without confrontation. Some ends are not loud. They come like this, quiet, firm, and final, not with revenge, but with a turning away. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.